I know that you think, and you've been taught this, that there's one first impression, one time for you to make a good first impression. You've heard that 100 times. But really, there are two first impressions in any sales environment. The impression that you make on the prospect and the impression the prospect makes on you. That person that you're meeting with has definite opinion about themselves. They have a way in which they carry themselves and communicate. Look at that as well as how you're coming across. Both of you are making impressions at the same time. The reality is, and you know this from your own experience, you may not be as aware of it as I'd like you to be, is that 65% of the way you communicate is nonverbal, 35% is verbal. I actually think there's an additional 10% that's floating out there. In other words, you ever walk into a meeting and you just sense it, you just feel it, something about it just feels right or feels wrong. So there's an additional way that we communicate. I don't want to get into that too much, but you know that experience. You've been there. I've been there. But what I want to talk to you about for a moment is what are the most obvious nonverbal communication signals that people give you. For example, you walk into a situation and the person isn't even looking at you. Well, that's an obvious nonverbal signal because they should look at you. But suppose they rub their nose or rub their ear or rub their face. What they're actually telling you is they're not comfortable with the situation. So you can look at that. If someone says to you, price is not a problem, but starts to rub their lips, it is a problem. You need to immediately pick up on that and say, I sense that there's something wrong. Maybe it's the price. And you're going to see that they're going to elaborate on that. For example, we've all seen this. We've all seen the person who crosses their arms as we have a conversation. They cross their arms and lean back. Well, we can interpret that as being defensive, or we can say they're cold. It depends on the situation. And you have to look for that, and you have to understand it. You all know that when we talk to somebody, they have things on their desk. Well, if I put down a piece of paper and they really are listening to me, they're going to move the things away from my paper to allow me access to them. So in essence, I'm really getting through. On the other hand, people who don't do anything, who don't write anything, are telling me that they're not as interested. Now, what are you doing in nonverbal? Well, for example, you take notes. Now, taking notes is important so you remember later what they said. But actually, it's a bigger issue than that. When you say to somebody, do you mind if I take notes? What you're really saying is, what you're saying is important to them. In fact, you actually don't have to ask for permission because you're saying it's important that I hear and write down what you've said. So non-verbally, you're communicating with them. For example, eye contact. We all think we make great eye contact. The reality is we really don't. There are certain cultures that do. We don't, as Americans, English, we don't tend to look directly in the person's eye, in the person's eye. So you want to think about that. You want to think about what it is you're doing that's either conveying positive energy or negative energy. If you're going into a meeting and you're shaking hands with somebody and you're not a firm handshaker, you may be conveying to somebody that this is a weak conversation. If you're going in and you're firm and excited about the visit, they pick that up too. Enthusiasm may be the key word that we want to use here, even though that's a verbal expression. We want to talk nonverbal. Be nonverbally enthusiastic about what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish helping them do what they do better.